The big summer blockbuster movie for kids scheduled for this coming June is Pixar's Inside Out 2. The original movie was all about feelings, and it debuted back in 2015, almost 10 years ago. And the premise was that we all have a base set of emotions: happiness, sadness, anger, fear, and disgust. Now, in the sequel, with puberty, our protagonist also gets anxiety, along with envy, embarrassment, and ennui. I do not doubt that I will be seeing this new Pixar show at some point, because we can relate. We all get anxious and worried at times, and I don't mean the level that gets to generalized anxiety disorder. Anxiety disorders are real, and people have an experience of anxiety that is beyond what most folks generally feel, and it is debilitating. What I want to talk to today is more that sense that we all get some anxiety. As we heard in this morning's reading, anxiety is nervous apprehension about the uncertain future. And we live in uncertain times. There is so much going on in our world and in our lives that can lead us to feel anxious. When I was a young minister, I learned a great deal about how to be a non-anxious presence. When counseling a person dealing with uncertainty or leading a congregation through uncertain times, we are taught the importance of being a non-anxious presence. The phrase comes from Ed Friedman and the Family Systems School of Thought. Life has a share of trouble for everyone, but we are not alone. We can support each other in our troubles. And we can be surprisingly helpful and supportive and empowering just by being a non-anxious presence with people. To be a non-anxious presence is to be calm in the face of trouble, to not try to fix or save or move or defend anything. It is instead simply to be present to what is going on, to be open and curious with people. It is not much of a leap to hear in this the message that anxiety is bad, and that we need to tamp down and get rid of all of our fear and anxiety. In her book, When Things Fall Apart, Pema Chodron shares this story about facing our fears. Once there was a young warrior. Her teacher told her that she had to battle with fear. She didn't want to do that. It seemed too aggressive. It was scary. It seemed unfriendly. But the teacher said she had to do it and gave her the instructions for the battle. The day arrived, the student warrior stood on one side and fear stood on the other. The warrior was feeling very small, and fear was looking big and wrathful. They both had their weapons. The young warrior roused herself and went toward fear, prostrated herself 3 times, and asked, "May I have permission to go into battle with you?" Fear said, "Thank you for showing me so much respect that you ask permission." Then the young warrior said, "How can I defeat you?" Fear replied, "My weapons are that I talk fast and I get very close to your face. Then you get completely unnerved and you do whatever I say. If you don't do what I tell you, I have no power. You can listen to me and you can have respect for me. You can even be convinced by me. But if you don't do what I say, I have no power." In that way, the student warrior learned how to defeat fear. Fear and anxiety live on the same wedge of the emotion wheel. They're similar. This Buddhist story of the young warrior is written with fear as the adversary. It is worth noticing the distinction made by Tracy Dennis Tiwei, in our reading this morning, fear, she notes, is rooted in the present moment, while anxiety is about an uncertain future. But the description from the story is still apt. My weapons are that I talk fast and get very close to your face. Anxiety is a normal part of our lives. We worry about things. We all feel fear. When faced with problems and trouble, we can get caught up worrying about what might happen. Anxiety prompts us to imagine the worst, to borrow extra fear in the form of anxiety over uncertainty before anything has actually happened. Shantideva, an 8th century Buddhist monk, once said, if you can solve the problem, then there is no need of worrying. If you cannot solve the problem, then there is no need of worrying. Or in a contemporary proverb, it says, don't trouble trouble until trouble troubles you. But the twist is that anxiety plays with this sense that when you don't know if you can solve the problem yet, you don't know. This leads us to put a lot of energy and attention around how to get rid of anxiety. Buddhist thought, however, leads us away from that idea that we need to stop having these feelings and experiences. Buddhist thought suggests instead that we embrace them. We accept them, not as good or bad, but simply as fact. This way, when we feel anxious, we can, in a good Buddhist manner, accept the feeling as simply something we are feeling. When we can separate the experience from judgment of the experience, we can receive it as information. And we can receive it even as it talks fast and gets very close to our face. We can take a breath and be curious. What is this anxiety revealing to me? I won't pretend that this is an easy practice. In my own experience, the information takes a lot of interpretation and translation, and it usually just sounds like alarms and panic. But with practice, we can learn the language of our anxiety and what it has to offer. When we can step back from the anxiety and take a breath, we open up the possibility that our anxiety is not just a stumbling block or a hurdle or a burden. It can be information that reveals something important to us. Anxiety can be a source of energy for change in our lives and in our communities. A few years back, there was an article in the UU World magazine by a psychologist and author, Robert Rosen, entitled, "Do You Have Just Enough Anxiety?" Rosen suggested that there was a healthy level of anxiety, just enough. It is the amount you need, he said, to respond to danger, tackle a tough problem, or take a leap of faith. He acknowledged that anxiety is usually unhealthy. Anxiety can interfere with our good judgment and normal functioning. Anxiety blocks our ability to respond. That's its trick. It can close us off to possibilities that would otherwise serve well. It narrows our vision, focuses on our fears and our inadequacies, our failures, our feelings of insignificance. This is our anxiety talking fast and getting close to our faces. Anxiety can close us down and send us off frantically in strange directions. Too much anxiety is a bad thing for our physical and psychological health. This much is well known and acknowledged by psychology and common sense. What Rosen adds to the conversation is this: too little anxiety is the face of complacency. It comes from the belief that all is well and an unfounded expectation that good times will continue unabated with no need for change or improvement. Too little anxiety leads to passivity, boredom, and stagnation. What are the things that trigger your anxiety? What makes you anxious? Often our anxiety is tangled up with our sense of self, but as often it's about the news and worries about war, politics. Buddhism teaches us to take a step back from the heaviness of our fears and anxieties. The step back is not disassociation, however. It's not disengaging or ignoring. It is a way to keep your footing and remain within your integrity and your balance. To touch back on that Pixar movie I mentioned at the beginning, I'll illustrate my point. In that original movie, the 5 emotions all shared one control panel inside a person's head, right? Sometimes anger would seize control of the buttons, and other times fear would jump in and deal with something when the others all froze up. So my invitation to you is to imagine your anxiety, when you feel it, has taken over that control panel. When I say we can take a step back, take a breath, and just receive the anxiety's information, it's like moving anxiety away from the control panel of our brains. I'm just saying don't let anxiety drive the bus whenever possible. It's still there. The alarm is still sounding. It's just not at the controls. It's important to acknowledge that what I'm describing is not a technique to get rid of your anxiety. It's a technique to give your anxiety a proper hearing without turning over the reins. And I'll also touch back on that idea of being a non-anxious presence, or at least a less anxious presence, perhaps. That's what I've learned over the years of really trying to live that. I'm a less anxious presence. I'd like us to notice that sometimes I am not sufficient alone to regulate my own anxiety and could benefit from having another person nearby to co-regulate with me. Simply at a physiological level, if I am with a person who is breathing slowly and easily, has a calm presentation, and is simply being present with me, then my breathing slows and my body begins to calm, to match the calm of the person I am with. Co-regulation is a powerful way to keep anxiety out of the driver's seat. Having another person's help is a key toward accomplishing my own capacity. Perhaps you've heard this inspirational story before. It's been floating around social media for a few years. The story says, I was 13 years old, trying to teach my 6-year-old sister how to dive into a swimming pool from the side of the pool. It was taking quite a while as my sister was really nervous about it. We were at a big public pool, and nearby there was a woman about 75 years old, slowly swimming laps. Occasionally, she would stop and watch us. Finally, she swam over to us just when I was really putting the pressure on, trying to get my sister to try the dive. And my sister was shouting, "But I'm afraid, I'm afraid." The old woman looked at my sister, raised her fist defiantly in the air and said, "So be afraid, and then do it anyway. Do it afraid." The trick is to not avoid all fear and all anxiety. The trick is to learn instead to acknowledge my anxiety, but not let it determine my actions. Again, not easy, but it's a practice to work on. Anxiety, like fear or guilt or anger or any of these other unwanted emotions, they are information about what matters to me and what has a hold of my heart. But anxiety should not be given free rein of my response to all situations. I can instead have faith that a little anxiety can be healthy. It can keep me just uncomfortable enough that I'm paying attention. And there is always the option for us to support each other in maintaining our balance. Change and uncertainty will always unsettle and make us anxious. And if we always avoid anxiety, then we will always avoid change and uncertainty in life, allowing for just enough anxiety, allowing anxiety a seat at the table, just not a hand on the controls, we can learn to lean into the trouble, trusting our own centered integrity to hold us. With both faith and a little anxiety, we can respond to all the challenges and beauty that comes our way in life. Let us join in singing our closing hymn.